Sick. Hey, everybody. I think we are live and on. Um, I, we should also be on. Oh, yeah. There you go. Fix that. Cool. We're testing everything out now. It's pretty exciting time. We should be live on Facebook as well, and we're recording. So maybe everybody could do like a thumbs up react if you can hear me. It should be at the bottom there. Sick. A bunch of thumbs up. That's so rad.
That's so cool.
I know this is fun. Okay, so again, thanks for joining. This is definitely an experiment, but I checked out an event in Moab over Not Turkey Boogie in last year. Matt presented this content, and I thought it was super cool. The unfortunate thing about that was I was the only base jumper that showed up. So we wanted to try presenting it in this format, see if anybody would be interested. So I am Lisa DeMusis. I'm a super new jumper, 1 year in, 100 jumps in, but I'm a total nerd for analytics and data, base number 2805. And I am here with Matt Blank, professional base jumper and host, co-producer of Exit Point. Sure you've heard of him. So we're stoked to have you on this talk, base risk analysis. We're going to talk about a variety of things. We're going to talk about the difference between risk and danger. We're going to talk about risk assessments and then have a little break and share a version of a risk assessment that Matt's made. I know a bunch of you also have your own risk assessments. I encourage you to email them to me. I'd love to get something going where we're all sharing our stuff. I think that's pretty rad. So throughout this, we'll have a couple polls. They're optional, but it'd be super cool if you could participate in them. I'm going to launch one now. We also have a Q&A. Feel free to submit questions. Matt and I will, try to get through them as we start our talk. So I'm going to launch this poll and
Exciting.
kick it off to Matt. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I kind of want to see how people answer this.
Yeah, for sure. Uh,
Ooh, so
so,
that
I
launched
mean,
a couple of them right there.
yeah, so we've got three entry questions here. We are curious if anyone's had uh, risk training before. The idea of risk analysis, comes from the business environment. It's used in military, a variety of things. We're interested in why people joined. And then we're curious if you think base jumping is safe. The rest of the polls are only single. So this one's the biggest one, the longest one, but pretty quick. So,
Where can you see the answers to these?
yeah, let me get a share going. I'll just share it with everybody.
Nice.
Yeah, why not? They should be anonymous, so no problem. Share that, and then we've got like all the answers coming in.
I can't see them yet.
Oh, you can't see my screen, dude?
I can see your screen, but there's nothing on it. It's just, well, I
Oh,
mean, there's an amazing
interesting.
picture of Moab on it.
Yeah, that looks beautiful, huh? Okay, sick. That's funny. Well, let me read them out to you. Okay, so we actually have like even splits across everything, which is super interesting. As far as training goes, 33% have no training, 44% have some, and 22% have
Okay,
advanced.
let's hold on that one for a second.
Yeah.
Say that one more time, and we're just going to do one at a time. And I'll ask for the answers to the next poll when we get to that section. So, answers to
Cool.
the first poll was what was the majority?
Literally like third split. The majority is some training, around 50% right now, but pretty much third between no training, some, and advanced training in risk analysis.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So, part of the challenge for this is that we normally do this in a small group and we do it in a live environment to try and get to the center of how risky a specific action that we're looking at is for a specific person. And that's going to be impossible in this format. But what we hope to do is just kind of cover the conceptual level of risk analysis and give a couple of tools for everybody that's listening to take home. And if you've got some experience in analyzing risk in another realm, it's essentially the same thing. And so that's great. The summary statement that I have for this entire thing is to put our lives at risk and not even know how to quantify the risk is to kind of roll the dice with our lives. So, if like me, you came up without this skill set, and it sounds like a third of you have come up exactly like me in this way, we're spending a lot of time basically getting lucky because if we don't know how to quantify the risk in a certain base jump, then who knows whether we're like that close to the line or not. So, on to the disclaimer. We usually do this in small groups. This is the first time we've done it in this format, and it's the first time that I've ever tried to teach online with this many people. So we're going to try and cover the most basic parts of this and then move on to something that I think everyone should be able to take home and manage. So let's go to the poll number 2. What was the questions and answers for that one?
Yeah, cool, cool. So why'd you come to this talk today? Um, so the largest group said, I want to see how I'm doing in assessing my own jumps at 62%. And then the two other large groups around the 45% are, I'm curious if it's possible to quantify risk and how that's done. And another 45-ish percent have a specific object they're thinking of.
Okay, awesome. So, um, if you've got a specific object in mind, I definitely recommend that you keep that in mind as we go through this. While this is not going to be able to answer that specific question for you, it will start making more sense if you can attach it to something that you actually want to do and attach all of these concepts to the skill set that you actually have. Having said that, it will be impossible for us to evaluate an individual object remotely like this. So, kind of set your expectations. Um, the next one, kind of seeing how you've been doing. That one's I kind of put on there as a little bit of a trap. It's an almost impossible task to retroactively figure out how risky you've been. Though I will say that there are a couple of things in here that will probably stick in a lot of people's craw and go like, oh man, if I had done that, I might have been more prepared for this thing and thus been feeling more comfortable on the exit point. And that's, I think, a valuable insight. Like if you can track back through and find that in some cases you haven't followed this process and your emotions were also like heightened at the time, that could probably give you an understanding of how to estimate how risky you've been. What was the other answer that mostly people said?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered all of
Covered
them. It
them?
was, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Having said all of this as well, if you've come to poke holes, that's totally fine. In fact, I want to set the expectations there too correctly, which is to say that there's holes all over this process. Like the way we understand risk in a very conceptual way is pretty solid. And in some environments, like in finance, for instance, where we've got so many metrics that we're tracking on a second to second basis, it's a lot easier to do that than in a realm like base jumping, where largely we've never even tried to quantify risk. And also, a lot of these elements are incredibly unique variables. So, caveat to that, if you want to poke holes in this, there's tons of holes to poke. And my hope is that after listening to some of this stuff, everyone that's listening starts to cover some of those holes and we get better at it. The last expectation I want to set is that the conceptual level here that we're going through is basically 10% of what you need to do in order to actually understand how risky a certain action is. 90% of that work is going to need to be done in the live environment with scientific tools, perhaps other people to bounce ideas off of, perhaps somebody that's already been to the thing that you're doing and done it. So this is basically 10% is just understanding what this is. All right, let's go to poll number 3.
Sick. Is base jumping safe? Crazy question. And like again, an even split because that's across the board. We've got 35% it's safe if we do it right, 26% it's safe relative to everyday activities like driving, and 40%, 39% really, it's never safe no matter how we do it.
Okay, man, excellent. Wow. Third across the board. That's incredible. So in order to understand risk, where we really need to start is semantics, the understanding of words. And it's very interesting that we're evenly split on whether base jumping is safe or not. Um, from my understanding of the word safe, it basically means that something is devoid of risk. You are incapable of meeting negative consequence. And so, for my money, I agree with the statement that base jumping is never safe. Doesn't matter how good we do it. There's always going to be a choice that we have to make to avoid serious consequences. So, in that regard, while we're base jumping, we always have to be vigilant. We always have to be prepared. One mistake could lead to us getting seriously injured or dead. However, I think the meaning of the word safe has changed throughout our generations. And now we have like even the top tier agencies like the USPA saying things like skydiving is safe or can be safe, which starts to skew what we think about the actual thing. So let's get back to semantics for a moment. Um, Semantics are the meaning and logic of words. And quite often in regular society, we hear like people just balking at that, like, oh, that's just a semantic argument. You know, why do I even want to bother with that? Which is fair because in most contexts, it doesn't really matter. Like, imagine ourselves on vacation and we're getting tired, ready to go back, and somebody goes, "Hey, let's go home." And one of your other friends goes, "Home? What do you mean? Like we're staying at a hotel? That's not home. Home is across, the ocean." And then, obviously everyone just gets annoyed at that person, goes like, "Oh my God, bro, like that's just semantics. Like, we know what we're talking about." Versus when we apply semantics in life and death situations, the meaning and logic of words becomes incredibly important. For instance, imagine yourself at a nuclear launch facility and you're one of the people that needs to like do a certain action for a warhead to launch. And your supervisor tells you to flick that button. And in front of you, you've got switches that flick and you've got buttons that press. And now you've got your hands in the air going like, okay, what the fuck do I actually do? And in that context, semantics are incredibly important. And I would say that they are in almost every life and death scenario.
Hmm.
To take it back to skydiving and base jumping, let's look at one word that we definitely have to explain, the word pull. Now, if you came up in an era like me where every single parachute being used was a pull out B.A.S.E pilot chute mechanism, then pull is confusing at first, right? And it needed to be explained to all of us that what they actually mean is pull and throw and let go, take out,
The
toss
whole
away.
sequence. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason that they needed to change that and like actually explain the semantics of that word is because it was originated in an era where all you needed to do was pull. If you came up in the ripcord days, that was exactly the motion, pull the ripcord. So if I've sufficiently explained semantics, let's get into two words that I think are the most important for this discussion, which are danger and risk. Danger and risk usually get seen as synonyms. And that's a problem because if we see them as synonyms, then we're not going to actually quantify them appropriately. If we look at the roots of both of these words, dangers are mostly objective, like things that you cannot change. For instance, if we're driving on the road, we cannot change that there are other cars on the road with us. That is a danger of the space. If we're out base jumping, and there's a rock garden below us, that is a danger of the space, which will not change. And so those dangers can be mitigated, but they are different from risk. Risk is a more objective and subjective element. It speaks to our ability to actually do the action sustainably. So there can be a high level of danger in something and a low amount of risk if we've prepared and planned and we're excellent at executing. Or something can have low danger because it's a relatively comfortable environment, but high risk because we haven't prepared at all and our probability of failure is very high. So, that being said, I think semantics are important. From here on, we're going to be referring to danger in a more objective sense and risk in a more subjective sense. Let's get into poll number 4.
Yeah, yeah, sick. And before we do that. Um, I think it's important to note that we're here to talk about risk, and there are ways that we can assess risk in our jumping if we want to. And it doesn't change, like you were saying, like it doesn't change the danger of the jump. The consequence is still there. The activity is still dangerous, whether you're assessing the risk or not. You can just be more or less prepared.
Yeah. Oh, also another thing. I'm kind of going through this as efficiently as possible so we can get to sections where we can answer questions and people can see a couple of the tools that we've developed. But along the way, if you have questions, please use that Q&A feature, and I'll slow down or I'll take a little tangent and answer anything that somebody has to say. Lisa, do we have any questions at this
Yeah,
point?
we've had thanks everybody for anybody that sent in support. I appreciate you, the acknowledgement that this is a thing. So we got some of those and I responded to them. We've got a couple more here. One of them is a little more focused around fear and how fear plays into these things. I think that's a pretty big topic. It gets talked a lot about in the podcast, so maybe we address it in a little while. And then somebody else. Yes, I'm going to send out a recording of this. So if you have to go, that is fine. Um, let's see what we have coming in for the polls, though. This poll was about canopy and
Oh,
preparations.
actually, that one, if we can do the one that is,
We can launch both.
yeah,
Sure.
how much do you think about things potentially going wrong?
hmm Personally, I think about them a lot. Okay. Just gonna end this one and then launch that one.
Excellent.
So we'll
Sweet.
have two polls. Um,
So,
and one of the reasons I was even inspired to do this is because I am just the type of person that thinks about things going wrong a lot. My answer would be I think about all the negative consequences I can come up with. So I like having a way to like standardize that, have a checklist in my head, make sure I'm, covering as much as possible.
nice. And can all the people that are just streaming this see those polls, or
I
only the
don't
people that
think
are?
so, so I have
Okay.
to kind of read them out loud. So right now, this one, we've got a ton of responses in. It sounds like people are thinking at least a little, which is pretty excellent. We've got 75% saying that they think about everything they can come up with, and around 26% thinking mostly about the parts that could kill them.
Okay. So the question being, how much do you think about things potentially going wrong? Most people say, I think about potentially all negative consequences. Uh, a few people say I think about the things that could kill me. How many people said I never think about what I don't want to happen?
It was zero, but then one brave soul
One brave
responded.
soul. Okay. I find that like that's actually a bigger category than we would imagine, and it's followed this kind of feeling that if you think about the negative consequences, you are potentially manifesting those to happen. And I just want to address that one real quick because I've heard it so many times, and it is not categorically untrue. If you sit there on an exit point ruminating about just the negative consequences and then also visualizing bad things happening, like you imagine an off heading and then you imagine yourself reacting poorly to it and then smashing into the wall and then careening down it, and if you spend all of that time doing that, then yes, you're building some bad muscle memory. Though, um, if you want to just circle that wagon and instead create good muscle memory, you can imagine those things happening and then imagine yourself reacting excellently to it. Off heading, and you pull exactly the right thing at exactly the right time and get yourself out of it. And that is good, like positive visualization. It should also lead to you understanding how comfortable you are doing that thing in an emergency. Like if the mental pathway to the negative consequence that you've created for yourself is super easy. Like you visualize the consequence and getting out of it without any problem because it's something that you've done a bunch of times or you know exactly how to do it. That is trending towards understanding that the risk of that thing is quite low. Versus if you see something happening and then your mind just goes blank as to like what to do, and you have to go through this analysis of like, okay, how did I hear how to do that? What? Oh man, okay, that's the answer. That could start to give you a signal that what you're doing is a little riskier than you're capable of pulling off. Um, as far as how much to ruminate on the negative consequences, um, I think it's nice to start with the things that could kill you. If you start there, you're going to build a pretty solid platform to be comfortable mitigating the rest of the consequences, which are slightly lower tier. So if you start with all the things that could kill you, and there's really only one decision point that could really get that done, then you start to quantify that risk a little differently. Like, for instance, first stowed jump at the bridge. Really, all you got to do to not die is pull that parachute on time. Like, you might get killed or you might get injured severely after that, but in order to survive, that's one thing that you have to do. Versus, let's imagine a wingsuit flight where you've got, you know, flying through trees, down terrain, all of this stuff. You might have 30 to 40 decision points, all of which are going to lead to death.
Hmm.
So if you
Yeah.
start with just lining those out, I think that's helpful. And then I also agree that you should go through all of the potential negative consequences that you could imagine so that you see if you've been preparing for all of those things. Obviously, we're all going to leave some of those out because we just don't know what we don't know. But at least covering all of those as best you can, I think, is the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, and it sounds like like we can build up risk, right? Like there's a difference between like throwing an aerial into a foam pit, throwing an aerial into a pool, and then throwing an aerial at the bridge, right? Those things all like just increase risk, and so there's potentially a progression to a lot of it.
Exactly. So let's get into the risk equation, which we're going to dumb down to the most basic we possibly can. And so if you're a mathematician out there, just grain of salt on this one. We understand that like there is a whole segment of actuarial math that has wildly complicated equations to try and quantify risk. But our whole goal here is just to get the very basic concept done. So the risk equation is a combination of subjective and objective elements. And it basically reads out to the probability of failure times the consequence of failure equaling the risk quotient. So let's talk about each one of those one at a time. We've got the probability of failure. If you're already thinking about all of these elements that could lead to negative consequences, then you're on the right track. The next thing is to understand how your execution and preparedness somewhat speaks to the probability that you are going to fail in that arena. Um, Probabilities of failure need to be measured accurately and reliably. And let's talk about this. So, like, let's imagine a simple jump off of the bridge. And you've got this landing area in front of you, which we know to be roughly the size of a football field. What is the probability of you not hitting that area? Well, if you've flown your canopy at the drop zone and you've lined out that exact area and you've jumped it 100 different times and always hit that area, then your probability of failure is next to zero. And for that to be accurate, what you'd need to do is jump the exact canopy that you're jumping at the bridge, um, actually line out the area as it exists at the bridge, and be jumping it in conditions like altitude and winds that you are familiar or that are probable at the bridge. That would be an accurate way of going about figuring out the probability. Reliable speaks to how many times you've done it. So let's say that we've only got one jump out of an airplane into an area that's the size of the bridge landing area. Is that probability very reliable? No. If you've done 100 of them, that becomes exceptionally reliable. So, um, probability of failure. I think it's also worth noting that a lot of people do this first section slightly backwards and they look at the probability that they will succeed at a given task. And I caution people against doing that because if you're looking for things that will bolster your argument as to how you are going to succeed, then there are innumerable things. There's an infinite amount of things that you could pull from to say, yes, I'm going to succeed at this. And there are somewhat more finite, there's somewhat a more finite number of things that you can point to when it comes to failure. And so rather than trying to prove that we can do something, we need to disprove that we can't do it in order to like come up with a more accurate and reliable understanding of risk. Now, any questions coming up, Lisa?
Let's see.
I flew through that pretty quick.
You did, but we might want to talk about the poll, like for the canopy preparation, right? Because um, that's kind of part of proving that we can do something.
Totally.
I know me myself, I jumped mine a couple times before I took it to the bridge, um, and so that was part of my preparation. I might just relaunch that poll if you think that's of interest.
Let's get into it in a little bit. I've got a couple of things to go through before we get there, and then let's pull that out when we're actually talking about people's first jumps.
Sure, sure, sure.
All right. So, after we find out what the probability of failure is, what would be the next course of action? Well, to mitigate those failures, and we mitigate those failures mostly through preparation and training. The next element to look at is consequence of failure. So just because we might fail at something doesn't mean that it's risky. There needs to also be a consequence attached to it. And there are a lot of training environments that we exist in where in which failure is necessary in order to learn. And all we do is try and mitigate the consequences of those failures. So, mitigation of consequences. Simply put, all we're trying to do is reduce the impact on ourselves. This can be done a whole different host of ways, like adding padding to your body, wearing a good helmet, being close to an area where rescue is available, having people in place to do that rescue so that you're not hung up on a cliff for 5 hours. All of those are mitigating the consequences of failure. So let's go into a couple of examples so that we can kind of get a sense of how we quantify probability of failure times consequence of failure. Let's imagine we're in a foam pit and we're doing our first exercise into the foam pit, which is generally flopping into it. And the consequence or the probability of failure of doing that is next to zero. Like you cannot fail at just falling over. Failing at falling over would just be to continue to stand up, and then an instructor would just push you into the foam pit. I don't know how you would fail that, but I don't think it's possible. Now the consequence
Low
of
risk, low
low
risk.
risk. Yeah. So let's put that as a zero. Consequence of failure. Well, I suppose if you faced forward and opened your eyes and then buried your head into the foam pit and the foam was that old type of foam that's flaking off, then you could get some foam in your eyes. But
There you go.
that would generally just be able to brush right off. And so I'd also say that the consequence of failure in this environment is next to zero. So our total risk quotient is essentially a zero. Now, before we get into the next example, I understand that everybody's probability of failure might be different, and everybody's caring about the consequences of the failure might be different. And this is where this scale becomes highly subjective and necessary for everyone to do for themselves. So if you look at a certain element that you're experienced in, and your probability of failure could be zero, where somebody else's probability of failure could be next to 100. as far as consequences go, and I think we have all experienced this in the base environment, some people care very much about not injuring themselves. Like they don't even want to twist a sock, you know? And some people don't care if they live or die on a given base jump. And so the consequence of failure being on this 0 to 1 scale of no consequence to certain death also needs to be put in perspective by everybody that's using it. I also will caution everybody that like this is one of the main things that you need to align on in group settings, that everybody is using the same scale. And if not, be aware of that, because the people who are risk averse might be putting people that are risk tolerant and vice versa in difficult positions. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, everybody takes on their own level of risk for every jump, and more people are going to be more comfortable with higher risk, lower risk, as well as like different sets of consequences as well.
All right. So, next example. Let's imagine that we're doing a crazy aerial into a foam pit with no training. Now, our probability of failure has gone dramatically up, like, to the point of almost certainty. You try a crazy aerial that you've never trained, 100% of the time, usually you're not going to succeed. The consequence of that failure, though, is still relatively low. So, let's imagine probability of failure at 100 and consequence of failure at a 0.01. All right. Well, our risk quotient is still pretty low. It's a 1. Like the probability that we're going to walk away from that okay is good. Now, let's say how the reverse of this goes. Let's go jumping the bridge with no parachute. Well, if you're jumping the bridge with no parachute, you are pretty much intending to go in.
Yeah,
And
I
so
think that's a one. Yeah,
yeah, well, I mean,
death.
so yes, but like, what's the probability of failure? Probability of failure is 0. You're going to succeed. You're going to succeed at your task,
Succeed at death. Yes.
right? Consequence of failure, 1, risk quotient, huge,
Mm.
right? Like when your risk quotient is that high, uh, all right. Next one, jump the bridge after proper training. And this is the one where I want to relaunch that poll and see where we go.
Did that. My answer would be I put a few skydives on it. And it was an interesting experience. I'm super glad I did it. My openings were spicy. Cool.
Okay,
So what
so yep,
the
for
stuff
everybody, go ahead.
the stuff that's coming in right now is around 60% of people flew it for the first time on their first base jump. And around 30% put a few skydives on it, and around 10% put substantial skydives on it.
Okay, interesting. Just as an aside, that's opposite of how it used to be in the heyday of base jumping, the bad old days, the original gangster days, the generation before me. No one would go on a base jump without having flown the parachute. That was like the
Mm.
first thing that you would do. You met somebody on the drop zone. They're like, "Hey, man, I want to get in base jumping." You're like, "Okay, cool. Like, you gotta learn how to fly this parachute first, and then like we'll teach you how to apply this parachute in the base jumping world." Um, and I don't want to dive too much into this, but it's worth asking all of ourselves why that is not the case today. Um, Now, acceptable risk quotient on a first jump. How do we achieve that? One of the things that we do to achieve that is to jump the parachute beforehand. And that gives us a verifiable way of looking at the probability of failure of flaring the parachute, flying it to the intended landing area, dealing with emergency procedures if we need to. Without doing that, your probability of failure flying that parachute is a question mark. And that's an interesting thing to start with when we're like putting our life on the line. If our equation for risk in total has question marks in it, but we're risking our life anyway, that really is rolling the dice. So, verifying probabilities. Achieving zero risk starts with verifiable probabilities, which starts with how you prepare for each element: the canopy flight, the exit from the object, the body control in the air, and all of these things have training methodologies that you can do in less consequential environments to verify the probabilities that you're going to succeed. Um, Mitigating consequences in this environment is the next thing. So maybe I can ask this: how many how many people how many people knew of all of the different emergency um, interventions that would occur if they got injured on their first jump? And you can just put it in as a Q&A right now. Like, if you knew all of the ways and things that would happen if somebody got injured on your first jump, please like throw that in.
Let's see. So actually, we do have an intro. I don't think this is what you necessarily asked for, but somebody did ask how many times you've walked away from a jump due to risk calculations, which I think is a super interesting question.
Oh yeah, that is a really interesting question. Um, to answer it as honestly as possible, I've never approached the jumps that the risk, you know, quotient was too high. So like where I've actually calculated those things and come up with, oh man, this is too risky, we just go back to the drawing board and start training again. One of those things was the first time I wanted to free fall Rubidoux, Riverside Quarry in Southern California. It's a 186-foot cliff. I wanted to free fall it. And I was with a lot of mentors that had a lot of experience with that cliff, including the Apex team who had done parachute testing there. And so I started quantifying the actual risk of it, and I had only maybe 50 jumps at that point. And my probability of failure was through the damn roof. And so I didn't even approach it. I took another year to train specifically for that thing, jumping objects of decreasing height, jumping objects of
Mm,
like equal consequence with more space, getting to know my parachute and exactly how much time it was going to take to open, turn around, the whole nine. And then I reapproached that jump.
right.
I
Well,
can also say that there was, I'll tell one story of this, me doing the exact opposite. So the first wingsuit jump that I opened internationally was in Turkey, and it was supposed to be the first wingsuit base jump that that country had ever seen. And we were all remote, so like we needed somebody to give us information on what they proposed us to do. Like they had this exit looked out, like a couple of local jumpers were like, yeah, this is going to be the perfect thing. But none of them were experienced wingsuit base jumpers. So they got in touch with me, Scotty Bob, and an old friend of ours, Ian Flanders. And we're like, okay, so give us all the details, the numbers on the jump, the exit altitude, the spacing, what does the exit point look like? What's the landing zone? Blah, 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 on and on. We got information that looked like it was an acceptable risk. So we got there, and as we started verifying the things that we had been told, each one of them was wrong. Like it
mm,
wasn't a 6.5 second rock drop. It was a 2.25 second rock drop. The glide ratio was not 1 to 1. It was 2 to 1. The landing areas that they had lined up were covered with telephone wires. The deck that we were supposed to jump off was a cantilever bridge that was rickety and only held in by two rusty bolts. Like there were so many things. Every single thing we went through, it started jumping the risk higher and higher and higher. The problem that we had on that jump was that we assessed each element one at a time, checked it off our list as doable without reassessing the entire jump in total, which led all of us into a very strange like mental blunder where we're like, okay, this element on its own is fine as long as everything else is good. Let's go. We're still a go. We're still a go. And at the end of checking all of these things, we just decided like, all right, well, this is a go. Did it, succeeded, but I would say it was an absolute mistake to have done that jump.
Hmm.
I think if we had taken a little bit more time and reassessed the entire thing from top to bottom, we would have seen that it was completely unacceptable, and I would have definitely walked away from it. So,
Cool.
um, yeah,
I think this brings us to another short section and a good question that just came in before we take a quick break. So we'll finish this section, take a break, and then look at an actual object rating scale. But the question that came in is, what role does intuition play in this type of risk analysis, or maybe even in the story that you just shared, what role could intuition have played in that scenario?
yeah, yeah. And intuition was definitely working in that state, but what we were doing is overriding our intuition because we really wanted to do it. So, like, those alarm bells were going off the entire time, but they were being really drowned out by the fact that we had, multinational sponsors and television crews, and you know,
Sure.
the country was sponsoring us to be there, and we really wanted to succeed. And so, like, that was the case.
Yeah.
Intuition plays a
Well,
huge
it's
role. Okay.
yeah, and it's interesting because it's also related to a topic we wanted to talk about, which was like training your emotions. So I think you'll probably touch on that.
Yeah, I'll definitely
Yeah,
touch on that as we get back from the break. But to answer this question directly, intuition plays this role of assessing risk on a subconscious level. Like, your body and mind understand way more than you can be consciously aware of at any given time. And so it's definitely crunching the data from all of the things that you are experiencing, like how the cliff is arranged, the weather conditions. It has in its like stores of memory all of the different things that you have done up until this point. So, like, it's a much more broad scope computer than our conscious mind, but it's not very specific. And so what you have to do in order to like make that a useful tool for yourself is when you feel your intuition telling you something, you go back into analysis mode. You slow down, you take stock of all of the things that are happening and try and come to an understanding of whether your intuition is telling you something that you can understand critically. There have been several jumps. In fact, I'd say it's in like the several dozen, like, 24, 36, somewhere in that range of jumps that I've walked away from with absolutely no reason to,
mm,
just simply because my intuition was alarm belling. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. I can't see it. I can't pull it to the forefront. All this looks like it's fine. And walking away and then coming back the next day and going like, oh man, like, I'm really glad that I walked away from that. I didn't see that happening,
yeah,
and it could be
yeah,
something as simple as like, we didn't see a ledge from the angle that we were on, or we get down and the weather immediately changes to the point where like we would have been jumping in that. It's
mm,
like, so I think intuition plays an incredible role in trying to assess risk, but the goal is to try and turn that sensor into something quantifiable.
totally, totally. And I mean, I've also had such an experience, even in my short time. Um, Stood up on my first solo for 45 minutes, walked down, and when I got back and laid on my couch, like I still felt so stoked because, sometimes a walk off is just as cool as a jump. To be alive is pretty great. And who knows what would have happened. Um,
100%. 100%.
cool.
Yeah. Walking off is a large part of experience. Um, if you don't mind, before we take this break, I didn't get through a couple of things on this first jump course or first jump. It doesn't
Sure.
have to be a course example, and then let's break.
Yeah.
So we've gotten to verifying probabilities. Like how to achieve zero risk in that environment is to actually do all of the things necessary, all of the competencies, but in less consequential environments. And as closely as they can relate to the first jump that you're doing, and as many times as possible to make them reliable. The next section is mitigating consequences. And this can be done so many different ways on a first jump. For instance, like wearing a full cadre of padding, knee pads, elbow pads, helmet, um, carrying with everybody some basic medical equipment so that if you pierce yourself, it's not, a situation where you're going to bleed out in 5 minutes. You can just stick something on there. Knowing exactly what the exit routes are for every possible scenario. So, like if somebody gets injured, in the river, how are we going to recover them? If they get injured back on the boulder field, how are we going to do that? Um, Going through all of those consequence mitigations, I think not only is important if they actually happen, but incredibly important for you as a jumper standing on the exit point because it takes all of those off of your conscious or subconscious or conscious mind and gives us way more capacity to execute in that moment. So, back to top, your emotions are going to be ultimately what gets adjusted by doing this risk analysis for yourself. And initially, when you're doing your first jump, that's the job of the instructor, coach, and mentor. The job of them is to actually take you through this process so that you've done all this work versus if you were relying on that person to have made these decisions for you, the risk analysis is in their head and not yours. And when you go to jump, you're going to find that it is more uncomfortable than it needs to be. um, in any case, more on that when we come back from the break. And if you've got any questions that have been circling your brain, throw them on here. In the meantime, we'll take a look.
Cool. Yeah, we're going to do a 10-minute break. And then when we get back, we're going to look at an object rating scale. And that scale will also be sent out after this so that people can use it, look at it, not use it. So we will see you in about 10. Sick. Thanks.
Hey, Lisa, can you still hear me?
Hey, I can still hear you. Can you still hear me?
Yeah. Are we still live?
I think so.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I will be right back.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. How are we doing? sounds good. Yeah. Let's see. So what are we missing out there? Like, then we're skipping over kind of training our emotions for risk. We touched on that, but we didn't like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's do that. Okay. Oh, not bad. Not bad. All right.
Hello. Okay, sick. We are back. Um, Couple cool things in the Q&A. Thanks for sharing. Someone shared a decision matrix. Maybe I'll include that in the emails out to everybody. I'd love to get everyone's own decision matrices emailed to me at some point. Maybe do like a group folder or something. I'm sure that people have some interesting ones out there. Um, and I am going to kick it off to Matt to talk a little bit about emotional training, and then we're going to get to this pretty sick like list and system that we got going on.
Okay, so I touched on this a little bit before we broke, which is your emotions are going to very much kind of signal how much of this risk analysis you've done. We do zero of it, we're going to be up there pretty terrified. We do a lot of it, we're going to be a little more comfortable. And I find that this is something that people discount initially because they want to conquer those emotions. Instead of what I'm going to recommend to everybody that wants to do base jumping long term is try to align those emotions. And that takes some training. So the training that you're going to do in order to align those emotions is to do as much of this risk analysis as you can and then tag your emotions along the way to see if they are, giving you something that's reasonable or unreasonable, something that's justifiable or not. And this will start to build solid intuition and emotions that are connected to factual things. And thus you'll be able to like reduce the amplitude of those emotions and kind of play with them. Like your fear response won't be something that's crippling anymore. It'll be something that's more like the spider sense that you see in that cartoon where it just like flashes and the world starts to go a little and you're like, ooh, something's happening. Um, the opposite is also true of our emotions. We can train them to be terrible. And you train them to be terrible by ignoring them in the moments that they are telling you something of value. So going back to the first jump, if you've never flown your parachute, if you didn't walk the landing area, if you haven't ever assessed an object, if you don't know where the exit routes are, if you don't know what happens if somebody gets injured, that's a lot of unknowns that your emotions should be triggered about. And if you override those triggers, they will start to get louder and then they will exhaust themselves and then they'll disappear. And that's a really scary proposition for anyone that's going to exist in a life and death environment long term. Because once you get into the more complicated realms where there's not somebody directly managing or supervising you, you need those emotions to be aligned with factual things so that you can react appropriately to something that might not be in your conscious awareness. So, I want to ask another question before we get into this next section, which is how people think most base jumpers die.
Do you want people to respond to that in the Q&A?
Yeah, if you could Q&A it, how do you think, like, what is the reason why most base jumpers die? And I'll tell you that, like, these get attributed all the time online. Like, you see a fatality come up and people, share what they think is the root cause of the certain fatality. Um, and I hear one thing more than anything else. And I'm curious if everyone listening also comes to that same conclusion.
Yeah, we got a few things coming in. Some people are saying maybe weather. Some people are saying poor planning. Some people are saying complacency.
Yeah. And I think complacency is the actual root. Though I think mostly what I hear online is that the person was just reckless or careless, like they didn't care. And I don't think that that's the case. Like 500 plus people have died base jumping. I've known 104 of them. And I can tell you that only 10 of them really didn't care. The rest of them just didn't know. And they didn't know because they didn't have a process to know. Like their process for evaluating an object was very binary. Can I do this? Can't I do this? Which puts it in like a scary risk category. It could be like just on the edge of possible and still in a
Right.
category of we're going for it.
Hmm.
Um, so, what we're going to see next is a very basic way of starting to process risk objectively. So let's see. So every other sport has some rating scale for the objectives on the thing. Like, climbing's got the V scale and the Yosemite decimal system, and river has their system, and mountaineering has their system. No one has really approached a base jumping system because there are so many different variables that it's hard to really articulate. Though this is our first attempt at coming up with some way of just looking at an object objectively and starting to understand the relative dangers. Um, I'm sure that we're leaving stuff out, and I'm sure that like in specific disciplines there are much more things that you need to add to this. Like this was developed mostly to understand slider down base jumping in Moab, though it would change dramatically if we were talking about wingsuiting in the Italian Alps. Tons more things that we would need to add, some things that are completely irrelevant. So uh, if we cruise down this list, oop,
There we go. Bigger
yep,
list.
nice.
Yes. Can you see the bigger list now? Is that
It's in
cool?
a small window.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll make it bigger.
Yep,
We're working on it. You know, iterative things
yep.
here.
It's all just a
All a big experiment. Here we go.
yeah.
Sick.
Okay.
So this is a document that I'm going to send out to everybody after though, so you can have this list if you'd like to try it out.
And this basically goes through the process that I take people through on their first jump. We do this offsite first to just assess an object, and then we do it at the bridge, Twin Falls, to try and relate those two things together. Um, it's worth mentioning that all of this is relative. So you might come up with completely different numbers on risk. You might come up with completely different numbers on these things than someone else. The idea is that we eventually have enough inputs that we can make safe assumptions about the relative dangers and risks. So each one of these is a category that I think is necessary to understand the total risk of a jump. We start with access. Is it legal or is it a federal offense? Because that definitely changes the preparedness that we need to bring into the situation. Is it technical? How hard is it to get to the top of the exit point? The exhaustion of it, the isolation, which speaks to like our ability to communicate with rescue services and that type of stuff, and the transportation. We move into services, and services are largely looking at the consequences of failure, trying to pick at that mitigation section. Medical services, extraction services, and communication, which don't in and of themselves have anything to do with the execution of a base jump. More they have to do with what happens when a base jump goes terribly wrong. The exit point. Now, anything that's related to the object can be taken as a separate element to try and understand what your probability of success or failure with that element is. Like the first one is slope. Well, if it's clean and level, then most of us are pretty comfortable saying that we can walk and jump across a clean and level surface. Done it millions of times. Versus an uneven jagged surface or a sloping down surface, which if that's your first time seeing something like that, that could be a level 5, in like how or an upper level of how risky that is. And when you start to look at that, you might like go back to the beginning and go, all right, well, let me get some training just running across surfaces like this, not base jumping, and see if I can mitigate that risk.
Yeah,
Surface type. Yep.
after my first cliff jump, I would run off of curbs and stuff, which is really silly, but it helped me.
Exactly. Yeah, and there are a lot of sure-footed, like free-running types that come into base jumping, and they look at a jagged, uneven, downsloping surface, and they go, the probability of failure of me like putting any foot in the wrong place is 0. Like I'm going to absolutely nail this because they have such an intuitive sense of their body and the surfaces around them. I wasn't like that coming in for a lot of different things. The downslipping exit was something that really like I needed to train specifically to increase my probability of success and decrease failure.
Mhm.
And so all the rest of these speak to uh, that process. So
Yeah.
rather than looking at the risk of the total object, I'm recommending that each of you look at each element of a jump and try and come to an understanding of the probability and probability of failure and consequences of failure for each one of these things. Then in each category, if you start to see like high risk in multiple of those categories, you can start to go, all right, I'm popping high on 10 of these elements. This might be out of my like bag of tricks right now. Versus as each one of them starts to look green flag, then okay, maybe this is possible.
Yeah.
Um, Ultimately,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
something that I will also share is a spreadsheet. So, like, I am a super nerd and I like to do it this spreadsheet way. And so, in here, I'll share this out. It's the list of everything you saw in there, and then you can put your own ratings and it sums it for you. So, you can kind of see, relative to any other jump. So, that's how I'm using it right now. Obviously, it can be used a million ways, but I like it.
Nice. And actually, can you keep that up for a second?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there we
So
go.
I've been talking about each one of these categories as able to do the entire risk equation for probability of failure times consequence of failure. Though what Lisa's done and what this is actually used for is to come up with a somewhat objective number as to what the total danger of the object is. So all she's done is gone through each one of these and assigned a number value, 1 to or 0 to 5, as to like how dangerous this thing is. So on one side, she's got the Perrine Bridge, which ends up, if she rates it, 30. And compared to Tombstone in Moab, which, if you input all those numbers, ends up being a 44. Again, this is all relative, right? We're not saying that a 30 is not dangerous. We're not saying that a 44 is dangerous. We are simply trying to come to an agreement on how much more dangerous or less dangerous one object is from another. And then you can start to understand, all right, well, my execution at a level 30 is near perfect, right? So where should I go next? Should I go to a 35? Should I go to a 40? Is it appropriate to think that I'm capable of doing a 60 if I've got good track record at a 40? And that's basically it.
So,
Uh, all right. Now, back to a more meta concept, which I feel like is necessary to mention right now. When we're using all of these tools to understand what the relative risk is and what the dangers are, we are not trying to convince ourselves that it's possible. We're trying to convince ourselves that it is like at least not impossible. So I guess to put that in more practical terms, you've done all these calculations. I'll warn you against going, fuck yeah, all the numbers are looking great. Let's send it, right? That confidence should come from other realms, your, experience and training, not the numbers. What those numbers should do is give you pause if they don't look right. So basically stating that these equations should be used to back us off of things rather than lend confidence to leaning into things. Okay. Um, let's do next poll.
yeah, yeah, feeling lucky.
Yeah.
All right, it's our last poll coming to the end here. Um, but it is, have you ever gotten lucky while base jumping? Do you think you've gotten lucky? Um, I've definitely gotten lucky, even in my short time. I think my building jump, I jumped 60, should not have gone that day. It did, and I considered that my whole luck jar. So after that, I think I just did like very basic, straightforward jumps for a couple months. Let's see. All right. Right now, 80% of people are saying they lucked out a couple times after making some mistakes. And 12% are saying that they intentionally and regularly take chances that require some luck. And then 8% say luck doesn't exist and it's all skill based to succeed.
Interesting. Wait, how many people say I intentionally and regularly take chances that require some luck?
13%.
All right. Oh man, I've been all over the map
Love
on this
it.
one. Um,
Yeah, you've been all of them.
yeah, all of them. So I think it's important to understand luck as a mathematical concept. Lucky is to succeed where the probabilities do not meet, like, are not in your favor. And the most basic way that I can explain this is taking it to the gambling world. If you're playing cards, for instance, let's say that we're playing Texas Hold'em and we've only got one out left in the deck, only one card that could win the hand for us. We go all in and our opponent's crushing us. And then all of a sudden we get that card. That was lucky. We beat the probabilities, we beat the numbers. Um, Versus the person on the other side who's like 99% chance win and all of a sudden loses, that person got unlucky. So where I think this gets tricky is that in base jumping and in air sports, we're not passive, we're active. And so there's always the opportunity for us to say, I was the one that created that luck. If I had not done that, I would not have been in this situation, like, and my counterpoint to that is yes, you still have to stay in the hand to win it. Like, you still have to do everything right in order for luck to bestow itself on you. But luck definitely always exists in terms of mathematics, in that if you beat the probabilities of, like, if you had to do that 100 times, could you do it 100 times? Did you even know that you had to do that in that moment? You know,
Mm,
were you just reacting to the situation, or were you proactive in the situation? If you were reactive, then you just found out right then and there that you could do that, right? Which I would say in and of itself is lucky. Like, some of
very
us are,
lucky.
yeah, lucky to be amazing at the things that we do. And most people who pursue base jumping are amazing athletes. Like, we wouldn't be here if we weren't.
Totally.
And so, um, I've definitely been in states where, I just go like, hey, I've made these conscious decisions during a jump. That wasn't luck. I crushed it. And to have somebody go like, all right, well, but prove it to me. Prove to me
Mhm.
that you knew that you could do that. Prove to me what the actual numbers are. Because if you don't know what the numbers are, then by default, you're getting lucky.
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
All right.
Um,
I
so is that
I think that's it.
okay? Then if that's it, I've got a couple of things to say. I think that I'm comfortable defining what the technical best base jumper is. And I'm curious to hear what people think about this. Hit us up now, hit us up later. But how I'm currently defining the best technical base jumper, and that is different from like the best expressive base jumper or many other categories. But the best technical base jumper, I believe, is somebody who has the most capacity to operate in the highest danger with the least risk.
Hmm. Okay,
So,
so
yep.
to me that sounds like aligning your competencies and your skills with your confidence to consistently perform those things.
Yes. So, imagine we have a wingsuit terrain line that's, 30 turns deep through the trees, through the rocks, all this stuff, right? There are a lot of people that could do that line. The best person, in my opinion, is the person that can do that with the least amount of risk, the lowest risk quotient. And that requires somebody to have done all of the probabilities and consequences and training and all of this other stuff. Um, Also, like, we can take it to a less consequential environment. Like, we go to the bridge. There are some people like that are just unkillable at the bridge. Like, Sean Chuma is unkillable at the bridge. He operates in that realm with the lowest risk quotient of anyone that I have ever seen base jump ever, period. Um, and so that, I think, is how I'm trying to define what the best is. And in defining it that way, I hope that you guys start to understand the very real and important differences between danger and risk. That being said, if there's any feedback that y'all have about anything that was said here, or the format that we're doing this in, again, this is the first time I've ever tried to teach and we've ever tried to present in this way. And so hopefully you guys have some feedback. It can, we'll take all of the critical feedback you have too to improve the next time that we do this or do it a different way. And I really appreciate you for showing up. And I really want to say thank you to Lisa for doing all the legwork here. She has done an incredible job trying to make this, observable.
Dude, thank you for allowing me. This was a super fun experiment. I'm not an event organizer. I don't run webinars. And I've only been jumping for a very short period of time. So, really fun experiment. Everyone's going to get an email with those documents attached, so you can take a look at them, use them if you want. Get back to us with questions. You can email me. There'll probably be a little poll in there just to see what people thought, because again, experiment, first time we've done it. And then any Q&A questions that we didn't really get to, I'll see if we can maybe respond to them
Hey,
asynchronous.
can we stick around and do a couple of those?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
let's
If anyone
we
wants to
can.
stick around, we're going to stick around for a couple minutes and answer some Q&A questions. Lisa, what you got?
Cool. I got this one right here, pretty interesting. It says within each category, so like each rating category, each thing to rate, um, how are you splitting out probability and impact? And so the example here is access, so the legality of something may have a federal offense, but maybe it's negligible because you're like literally in the middle of nowhere. So how do you weight those two things when you're rating 0 through 5?
Yeah, I mean, so we do this all the time. We used to do this all the time in Yosemite. So Yosemite is a federal offense, and the consequence of getting caught in Yosemite is large, huge. Um, and so, really, like the consequence of that failure is a static, right? The static is, or a static element. If we get caught, we will face $3,000 of fine and get kicked out of the park. How do we mitigate that consequence is the next section, which I think you're asking. Like, if we jump El Cap, we're not mitigating that consequence at all. It's central to the valley, it's in the view of every single person. If we jump, however, Half Dome, where it's a 45-minute trek for the nearest ranger, and there's no way they're going to post a ranger out there, we've effectively mitigated that consequence to an acceptable risk level.
Mm.
And so that's how
And
you go ahead.
yeah, and so if you were to rate both of those jumps, one of them would actually potentially have a different access and legality rating than the other one, even though they're in the same region.
Yes.
I think that's what they were trying to get at. Like, does the probability of something happen go into the 0 through 5 rating that you're giving it, or is it just the static nature of what it is? It's either
Aha.
legal
Yeah.
or not legal.
No, yeah, yeah. The five good that's static, right? So like
Yeah,
regardless of your mitigation, you need to rate that thing objectively. Like
right.
it is or it either is or is not a federal offense. And then when it pops a five on that federal offense level, then you start going, all right, how are we going to mitigate this? Because obviously that's high.
Sure. Yeah, cool. That makes sense. Hopefully that answered. It was anonymous, so okay. All right, let's see. Let's see what else we got in here. Let's see if we have anything else. Somebody asked to show the formula again, which I could do. Somebody else asked, how do you personally decide how much risk is acceptable on a specific jump? I mean, I think that's up to the person, right? Everyone takes their own level of risk, but what do you think about that?
Yeah. So basically stated, I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. I'm here to very much serve the sentiment be informed then choose, right? So my goal in all of this is for everyone listening, everyone out there to be able to make more informed decisions about base jumping and the risks. How you decide or how I decide whether something is worth it is to look at what I'm going to get out of it. That's um, the value proposition, the risk reward, right? So the next equation is looking at your risk quotient and comparing it to your reward quotient, which in some cases for me has been incredibly high. Like some jumps are just epic. Like you end up at the top of this beautiful mountain, with the weather perfect and the, most awesome friends to fly down this line that you're never going to see again because it took so much effort to get there. The reward on that flight is just monumental. You're creating this lifelong memory versus like the I don't know how many hundredth time I've jumped Tombstone at this point, where like the reward of that is next to zero. And so like, when I start looking at risk going up in Moab, I don't accept almost any. Like I'm the most fair weather base jumper out here that exists. I'm like that surfer that only goes out when it's like peeling 6 foot overhead perfectly.
Yeah, totally. Okay, let's see. We might have one more. I think that actually might be it. Got
Okay.
some comments. There's some people that asked, why weather isn't included in that scale. Um,
Ah,
it's,
yeah.
that's super variable, so it
Yep.
changes all the time.
That's it. Yeah. So this scale is just the objectives, right? Which can be easily measured against other people's inputs versus when we start to put the subjective elements in there, the changeable, the variables, it just becomes a lot more complicated. So like right now the idea is to take this scale and then apply all those other variables to it, like your skill set, your techniques, the manner with which you're going to jump it, the weather conditions, the group that you're in, all of that stuff um, starts to speak to the mitigatable factors that you're going to bring into the situation. So, like, if let's say that, something on that scale rates to 100, like it's that dangerous. Well, that's saying that, like, okay, what are now the acceptable weather conditions that we can jump 100 in?
Hmm.
Pretty much
Sure.
perfect only.
Yeah. Yeah. Sick. Okay. That's all of them. I think we got it.
Ooh, do you want to do Dan's question?
Oh, 359.
Yeah, or do you
Yeah,
want to leave that
sure.
one on the table for later? This one's not really related to what we're
It's not
talking about.
related. I feel like maybe we leave it. Maybe I reach out to him and say we're gonna maybe do another one.
Okay. Sounds
Yeah,
good.
cool. Sick. Well, thanks again everybody for joining. I'll send out all that stuff. This was super cool, super interesting. I'm glad there were so many people. Have a rad day. See you out there.